In one of the busiest cities in the United States, there lived a billionaire named Richard Coleman, a man whose name carried power in boardrooms and fear in business circles. He was the founder and owner of a massive facilities management company that provided cleaning security and maintenance services to hundreds of corporate buildings. Across the country from the outside, everything looked perfect. Profits were high, contracts were strong, and managers constantly praised their teams. But Richard felt something was missing. Reports and numbers could not tell him how his employees truly behaved. When authority was not watching, late one night alone in his penthouse office, Richard made a bold decision. He would disappear from the public eye and return to his own company as someone no one would respect. A janitor within days, the transformation was complete. His tailored suits were replaced with worn uniforms, his polished shoes turned into scuffed work boots. He grew a rough beard, lowered his posture, and practiced a quiet, humble voice. Using a false name and forged documents prepared by his legal team, Richard Coleman became Rick, a newly hired maintenance worker, assigned to one of the company's flagship office buildings. On his first morning, Rick arrived before sunrise. The building was cold, silent, and towering. As he pushed his cleaning cart through the marble lobby, he noticed how invisible he had suddenly become. Executives walked past him without eye contact. Some nearly bumped into him and didn't apologize. A few whispered complaints about lazy cleaners. Even though his shift had barely begun, Rick was assigned the hardest tasks. Overflowing trash rooms blocked drains and floors. Others avoided supervisors, spoke to him sharply, never asking his name, only barking orders. One manager openly mocked his agent's speed, warning him that people like you are easy to replace. Rick nodded quietly, hiding the storm of thoughts behind his tired eyes. But he didn't come to argue. He came to observe throughout the day. Rick listened carefully. He heard how workers spoke when they thought no one important was nearby. He noticed how some supervisors cut corners, blamed cleaners for mistakes they didn't make, and took credit for others' work. Every insult, every careless word etched itself into his memory. Yet amid the coldness, something else appeared. A young receptionist smiled at him and said, "Good morning." A security guard showed him where to get free coffee. An older cleaning woman quietly helped him finish a heavy task without being asked. These small moments stood out more than the cruelty. Rick realized that true character revealed itself not through titles, but through everyday actions. As Rick locked his supply closet at the end of the shift, his hands ached and his body felt heavier than it had in years. But his mind was sharp and awake. This was only the beginning. He hadn't yet seen the full truth. But already the mask of professionalism he had trusted for so long was starting to crack, and what he would discover next would change his company forever. By the second week, Rick had fully blended into the background of the building. His presence was no longer questioned. He was simply another invisible worker, pushing a cart down endless hallways. That invisibility, however, gave him access to the raw truth of the workplace. Conversations became careless. Masks fell, people spoke freely, unaware that the quiet janitor was listening. With the attention of a man who owned everything around them, supervisors began using Rick as a dumping ground for their failures. When supplies went missing, he was blamed. When a client complained about a dirty floor, his name was written on the report, even on days he wasn't scheduled there. One manager, Mark, seemed to enjoy humiliating him. Mark would clap loudly behind Rick to make him jump, laugh with others, and remind him that this job is the best you'll ever get. Rick swallowed his pride and said nothing. But silence was part of the test. Rick noticed how fear controlled the lower-level staff. Many cleaners worked extra hours without pay just to avoid trouble. Some were undocumented, others desperate to keep their health benefits. Management knew this and used it. Threats were subtle but constant. "There are hundreds waiting to replace you," was a sentence Rick heard almost daily, yet kindness continued to surface in unexpected places. Late one evening, when Rick was scrubbing grease from a stairwell, a night shift security guard named Thomas stopped to help. Without asking questions, he took the brush and worked. Beside him, Thomas spoke about his daughter's college dreams and how this job barely covered the bills. "Doesn't matter who you are," he said quietly, "everyone deserves respect." Rick felt those words settle deep in his chest. Another day, a machine malfunction caused a water leak across an entire floor. Before Rick could even understand the problem, Supervisors began shouting his name. He was accused of negligence and threatened with immediate termination. Employees watched silently, afraid to intervene. Only one woman, Maria, stepped forward. She explained that the machine had been faulty for months, and management ignored repair requests. Her voice shook, but she stood firm. The confrontation ended without resolution. But Rick knew something important had happened. Maria had risked everything to tell the truth. That night, alone in his small rented apartment, Rick removed his uniform and stared at himself in the mirror. The disguise no longer felt like a costume. It felt like a lesson carved into his bones. He realized that leadership reports had lied, not with words but with omissions. The real company culture lived in these hallways, in whispered fears and quiet courage. Rick opened a notebook and wrote names not just of the cruel, but of the brave. He knew the final phase of his test was approaching. Soon he would stop observing and start revealing. And when that moment came, no one would be able to hide. The third week began with an uneasy feeling in the air. Rick sensed it the moment he stepped into the building. Whispers followed him down the hallways. Supervisors watched him more closely, as if they were waiting for a mistake. The pressure was no longer subtle. It was deliberate that morning. A critical client visit was scheduled. The building had to be flawless. Every floor shined, every surface inspected. Rick was assigned to operate an industrial cleaning machine. He had warned management about before. The equipment was old, unstable, and prone to malfunction. His requests for repair had been ignored. Halfway through the shift, the inevitable happened. The machine overheated, sparked, and suddenly shut down, releasing dirty water across the executive floor. Alarm sounded. Employees froze. Within minutes, Mark and two other supervisors rushed in, faces red with anger. Without investigation, they pointed at Rick. "This is your fault." Mark shouted, "You've embarrassed us in front of the client." Rick tried to explain, but his words were cut off. He was threatened with termination, accused of incompetence, and ordered to leave the floor immediately. The client stood nearby, watching in silence. The moment felt designed to crush him. Then something unexpected happened. Maria stepped forward again. Her hands trembled, but her voice was clear. She explained that the machine had been reported as unsafe. Multiple times Thomas joined her, confirming the reports one by one. More employees spoke up. Each voice was hesitant, but together they formed a wall of truth. Mark snapped back, threatening consequences. The room went quiet. Fear filled the space like smoke. Rick stood there, absorbing it all. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment when people chose between safety and integrity. He looked at the faces around him, the bullies confident and cruel, the silent ones paralyzed by fear, and the brave few standing despite the risk. Rick made a decision. He calmly apologized to the client and asked for a private moment. His tone carried authority that didn't match his uniform. The client, confused but intrigued, agreed. Rick then requested that all employees be called to an emergency meeting. That same afternoon, supervisors objected, but something in Rick's voice stopped them. That afternoon, the building buzzed with rumors. Some said the janitor had lost his mind. Others feared mass layoffs. Rick returned to his apartment and opened the notebook one last time. He reviewed every name, every action, every word. The test was complete. As the sun set, Rick dressed carefully, not in the janitor's uniform, but in a tailored suit he had kept hidden since the beginning. He looked at himself in the mirror. No longer the invisible worker, but the man behind the curtain. Tomorrow the truth would be revealed. And for many in that building, life would never be the same again. The conference room was packed. Every employee, from executives to night cleaners, sat in tense silence. Rumors had spread all morning, but no one truly understood why an emergency meeting had been called. Some feared layoffs, others expected another lecture about performance. At the front of the room stood an empty podium. The door opened. Gasps rippled through the room as a sharply dressed man walked in. Confident and composed, it took a few seconds for recognition to hit, and when it did, faces drained of color. The janitor they had ignored, mocked and blamed, was gone. Standing before them was Richard Coleman, the billionaire founder and owner of the company. For a long moment no one spoke. Richard placed his hands on the podium and looked across the room. His gaze was calm but heavy. "For the past 3 weeks," he began, "I have worked among you as Rick. A maintenance worker, I cleaned your offices, took your insults, and listened to your conversations. Rumors spread like wildfire. He spoke without anger, which made his words sharper. He described what he had seen. Supervisors abusing power, workers being threatened, safety issues ignored, and people treated as disposable. As he spoke, Mark and several managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then Richard changed his tone. He spoke about kindness, about the receptionist who greeted him every morning, about Thomas who helped without being asked, about Maria who risked her job to speak the truth. When he called their names, the room turned toward them, their eyes filled with disbelief. These people showed character when they believed it would cost them everything. Richard said that is leadership. The consequences followed. Several supervisors were immediately terminated for misconduct, and falsifying reports. Others were placed under investigation. New safety policies were announced on the spot, along with anonymous reporting systems to protect workers. The room was silent, absorbing the weight of it all. Then came the rewards. Maria was promoted to operations manager. Thomas received a full scholarship for his daughter and a leadership role in security. The cleaning staff received raises, benefits improvements, and public recognition. Applause broke out, hesitant at first. Then powerful Richard closed the meeting with a final message. Titles do not define worth. Power does not excuse cruelty, and respect should never depend on a uniform. He paused. If you treat people well, only when you think someone important is watching. You have already failed that day. The company changed. Stories spread across the country about the billionaire who became a janitor to reveal the truth. But inside the building, something deeper shifted. People looked at each other differently. They spoke more carefully. They remembered, because they had learned a lesson they would never forget. Character is who you are when you think no one is watching.